Is there something, do you think, that's hard coded into our DNA to have an enemy? Because it seems like this is always our mindset. It's like you have to either demonize Russia, you have to
Uh-huh.
demonize Iran, or if you don't do that, then you have to demonize China or demonize
Uh-huh.
Palestinians. I don't
Yeah.
understand. Or is this
Right.
just a product of being a global hegemon? Because I don't feel like when I was living in China that there was ever that feeling amongst the Chinese that there was
Uh-huh.
like these were the bad guys and these are the. But in the
Yeah.
United States,
Right.
it's always there's an enemy. You have to have an
Yeah.
enemy. Is
Yeah.
why
No.
is
No.
that?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit hard to explain. I think but it's been part of, you could say, the American DNA for quite a while. Um, of course, it happens in wartime. I guess for any country, if you become involved in a major war, there's a tendency to demonize the enemy. I guess the strange thing and the question that needs to be asked is why, after the end of World War II, it should have been like after World War One, there was actually a real effort to critically assess our involvement and also to admit some of our errors and exaggerations. There were a lot of atrocity stories that came out about the Germans, and afterwards, American scholars and journalists said, okay, a lot of that just wasn't true. Let's be honest. Okay, we really did get overheated. It never really happened after the end of that was after the end of World War One. But after the end of World War II, it seemed like it was just we went into a permanent state of if not actual war, but of ideological warfare. And I don't really have an answer for that. I guess you can always point to the interests of the military-industrial complex. It actually is in their interest to have an enemy. It's in the interest, of arms manufacturers and that whole complex around them to have an enemy. And so I'm sure that's part of it, but I don't think it can be purely that. It's not purely monetary. There's something ideological that it just became part of the American identity to be forever on a crusade. It's just the opposite of what America was intended to be originally. I guess it was Quincy Adams who said, that we shouldn't be in search of monsters to slay. And now we just feel like we have to have a monster and we can go out and slay it. That's part of being an American now. And if you don't, you're not fully American.
And now we have multiple monsters that we have fabricated that don't need to be monsters.
Right, they don't need to be monsters. There was a real effort, like in the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union. There were people like Pat Buchanan and others, on the left too, who said it's now time to become a normal country. Let's become a republic. Stop being an empire. I know Pat Buchanan wrote a book with more or less that title around that time. And there was some hope that we could do that, but it failed. It's like the imperialists, right? The crusaders, the ideologues ended up winning, and they found new enemies. And at first it was Islamic terrorism, but now of course we added Russia and China to the mix, and we really have
right. With countries like Russia and China, they never wanted to be our enemy, and I mean China is trying to do trade with us. I mean, isn't it true that Putin wanted to join NATO and was rebuffed? I mean, can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean,
I don't know the details of it, but it was in fact true. I mean that it was like in the soon after he took power, there was an effort, and he was told no, and then in the years that followed, I think it was clear that Putin was bending over backwards, and in general. Okay, the Russian government and Russian society was oriented to the West and saw that their future, was with the West. The last thing they wanted was actually to break relations, which is where they find themselves now. But they were continually, the olive branches were always smacked down, and it's a history that we've gone over before. And now Putin himself says, okay, he was naive. He should have seen the signals that there was this very real hostility towards Russia, and that shouldn't have ignored it. He was trying to look past it and just look for common interests, but it failed. The Minsk Accords is one of the best examples of that. Mm-hmm. And I think the Chinese have had a similar experience, and it's actually they're sort of a little bit behind the Russians, but now they're catching up. After they just find there's this unrelenting hostility, and they finally realize that okay, yeah, there's just really not a whole lot that we can do. It's just that there is this government, for whatever reason, is out to get us. It wants to damage us, wants to limit us, wants to weaken us.
Mm-hmm. And it's such a shame because it just didn't have to be this way. No. I remember one of my econ professors was Russian, and she told us this story about when McDonald's first came into Russia, and how she went there with her family. They lived somewhere a long ways away. They went and visited Moscow, and they went to the McDonald's, huge line. And she was so excited about it. Everybody was just so excited to have American stuff here. Yeah. And she got the receipt, and she had it framed, the McDonald's receipt, and it was in her room. Yeah. And this is a sentiment that was most of Russia was like this. They just loved America. They wanted to be part of America, part of the America's sphere.
Right. And it was also true of their government. It was actually, I think like the pro-Western elements actually persisted in the government longer than they did within the general population.
Mm-hmm. And it was the same thing when I was in China. When I was in China for the first time was 2010, but then from 2012 all the way to 2022. Whenever I would get in a taxi and talk to people, or just they'd ask you, where are you from? You said Waigoran. I'd be like, oh, I'm from America, and they would love it. They would be like, yes, America, number one. Although starting towards the end, I wasn't getting it as much. I could see things starting to change, but there was always there was never any animosity from the Chinese towards America. They loved America, and they loved the movies and the music, and they always talk about hamburgers.
I think the Chinese food actually is much better. They really don't eat hamburgers.
But they just think it's they don't. But they just think it's interesting. That's always the thing. They're like, oh, 你们吃汉堡包. They always say that. Okay. But this is it just makes me think of the world that could have been. Yeah. That these countries like Russia and China, they loved the United States. They wanted to be part of it. They wanted to work with it, integrate it, learn from it. And grow alongside it. But
that's the world we could have had if, let's say, Pat Buchanan, on the right, or Ralph Nader on the left, had become president. They were both, third-party candidates, but they were shot down. The establishment.
Right. Yeah. It would be great to be proud to be an American. You go to these other countries, and people are like, oh, yeah, you guys are awesome. You're not invading everybody and trying to make an enemy out of my country and demonizing and spreading lies and fomenting revolutions. We could have just been that, the real beacon of light of freedom and censorship and prosperity and peace. But we took the wrong course, and we're in this situation where we've dug ourselves a deep hole, and we have no choice. Or we do have a choice, but our State Department feels like there's no choice but to double down. The neocons are too embedded into our foreign policy. So it's sad. But yeah, I was just having that thought last night, like what the world that could have been if we just had some more reasonable people. Can you point at a time where we made that mistake and consciously decided that this was wrong? Was it Bill Clinton when he decided to expand NATO? Like if there was somebody else that won out, or...
Well, sounds like it was actually in relation to Russia. It was the hostility to Russia, the decision to make Russia the enemy, actually was made at a very early stage. It wasn't general open policy, but Jeffrey Sachs was intimately involved in negotiations between the new Russian government and the West, and particularly the U.S., and in helping to devise their economic policy, says that because he had earlier worked for Poland, and now he was over Russia. He was going to try to introduce some similar macroeconomic policies, and right away he found out that there was a completely different attitude. Whereas in Poland, oh yes, we can do that for you. $1 billion will be in your, in the Polish bank account tomorrow or whatever, to support this new, the issuance of the new currency or whatever it might be. In Russia, oh no, I'm sorry, we can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. There were people, at the highest level of government said always never stop seeing Russia the enemy. It makes you realize that it wasn't so much for them about Soviet ideology. It was for some reason Russia. Now I can't explain that there, but that was there. So that was the 90s and the faithful. In the 90s, at least you had a debate like within the U.S. A lot of people came out, and real statesmen, people, George Kennan, who was considered like the architect of our Cold War policy. Came out and warned strongly against NATO expansion and predicted the consequences, quite presciently. Things came out just the way he said they would. In fact, he said that, we're going to ignore Russia. Finally, they're going to respond. And when they do, we'll shriek and say, look, now, we proved that they're evil. That's exactly what he said. That's exactly what happened. So,
Is he still around?
quite, real prophet when it came to that. He's not, he's passed away quite a while ago. But yeah, during the 90s, you had a lot of people, even heads of the Defense Department and in the American community. There was an open debate, and a lot of people were saying, hey, this is a really bad idea. And Clinton was, the guy, he's not an ideologue. He's a politician. And then he just, I think mainly for domestic political reasons, like he decided to go ahead with this. And so that was a fateful decision right there, kind of in the mid-1990s. If I would point to one time, there was a brief kind of opening, a window, especially in the early 90s, a few years after, the Soviet Union dissolved, where it looked like, maybe we really could have the American empire, NATO could gracefully, say mission accomplished and dissolve itself, but those things didn't happen. There was a decision to keep NATO, and not just to keep it, but to expand it. And I think that was probably the beginning of the end right there.
Oh, what a shame. What a shame. Because now there's no political force.
It's completely silent. That's right. So now you have people like Jeffrey Sachs, who have been just pushed out of the mainstream entirely. Right. These were, again, people were right at the center of power. You would have even up until right before the start of the SMO, he could call the White House directly and say, hey, you need to negotiate. They made an offer. You can, we can negotiate. We can avoid a war. And he was just told, no, we can't do that. When the war happened, and now, he's just completely cut out. He was still actually, interestingly, he would still appear in mainstream media until I think it was a Bloomberg interview. And they asked him start talking about the Nord Stream pipeline. And he said, yeah, you believe the U.S. blew it up. And their jaws just dropped to the floor. And that was it. No more Jeffrey Sachs. But
it's crazy. It's true. Jeffrey Sachs wrote like half of my undergrad econ textbooks.
Right.
I knew his work well. And he was right there, like you said, everywhere. Now he's been relegated to small independent YouTube channels because they're the only ones that will have him on. It's like,
and who knows, they may get, he may get shut down at some point. We'll see. Some of the channels, we'll see. We know what happens.
I hope ours never does. I think luckily right now we're small enough, we're flying under the radar, but we do need to be careful, I believe, because and that's just scary that we live in that type of world where the U.S. is supposed to be free speech. I don't feel like we're doing anything wrong, but clearly there are forces out there that believe that we are.
Right.
And that is a serious situation.
You never think. Like here, I'm not. I want the best to happen for the U.S. The best to happen for the U.S. is for the U.S. to become a republic again. To actually go back to its roots and focus on its own problems. I think this is actually, if you talk to the average American and you start putting in those terms, they'd understand. It's a patriotic thing to do.
Right, right. It's these forever wars are destroying the United States. It's not patriotic to support this.
Right.
It's destroying our our reputation on the world stage, and it will have disastrous consequences. Economic consequences with the de-dollarization. We too will become an international pariah. We will refuse to try to join the multipolar world, which sounds like a fantastic thing to be part of. And just the real danger is that as the U.S. empire collapses, will we try to take the rest of the world with us? And we're kind of going that direction right now. So let's hope it doesn't happen and cooler heads prevail. But just looking at our political system and the size of our State Department, that just doesn't look good. It feels like it's going to come to a total collapse where basically maybe the people will just be like, hey, well, we didn't vote for any of this. Can't we? This is getting too out of control. And then there's going to be chaos and unrest. Any way that this plays out, I just don't see it playing out well for us. We don't have any. We've talked about how in Israel there is no political force to oppose Netanyahu. I feel like in the United States, really, there's no political force to oppose Zionism, support for Israel.
Unfortunately.
There's a small political force to end the war and normalize relations. Maybe not even normalize relations with Russia, but at least end the war in Ukraine.
Right, and maybe, reduce the hostility. There is some, so there's a reason to be somewhat hopeful on that front.